At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the VoiceOgre, and let's begin.
The ship screamed as its frame tore apart. "Port thrust is a slag!" Esme Solana shouted, her grip straining the yoke's worn material. The Peregrine's cockpit strobed with red alerts, the air thick with the chemical stink of burning polymers from crackling conduits. "Inertia dampeners are sputtering. We're a brick, Stitch, and we're falling fast." Captain Merrick Stitch Rask grunted, stabbing at a secondary control panel. Chasing power already gone.
"Gunner, status on the aft cannon."
A low rumble answered.
"Coolant line's a vapor."
Gunner Creed said from the gunnery station.
"It's slag."
His voice cut through the noise, steady as bedrock.
"Just our luck,"
Rask muttered.
"Ambushed by Hylian bone pickers, 2 jumps from a payday."
A proximity alert shrieked. Esme wrestled her controls, her face illuminated by the phantom green light of a schematic on the Peregrine's stern. A hostile ordnance marker blinked over the engine housing. "I'm just suggesting which part of the ship hits first."
"Fire countermeasures,"
Rask ordered, his voice flat.
"I fired them 5 minutes ago."
The torpedo hit. The ship's magnetic field, flickering in its final moments, deflected the worst of the blast, turning a direct hit into a glancing blow. The kinetic force slammed through the ship. The cockpit became a storm of sparks and shuddering serosteel. The force threw Rask sideways against the bulkhead, his head cracking against a support strut. For a moment, silence and white light consumed his universe. Then, agony, sharp and absolute, drove through his left side. He looked down. A shard of the shattered console, a jagged piece of polycarb the size of his hand, had buried itself deep in his gut, just above his hip. The pain was a distant signal from a failing outpost. Something else rose to take its place. A cold fire spread through his veins, a familiar hum that vibrated up his spine and settled behind his eyes. A chemical cascade that overrode his own mortality. His heart pounded a frantic triple time against his ribs, each beat a command to act.
"Stitch!"
Esma's voice cracked.
"Stitch, you're hit!"
A muscle knotted in Rask's jaw. The world sharpened, edges honed to razors. The blood blooming across his fatigues was just data. The pain was just a reminder. He yanked the comms panel from its mangled housing, trailing wires like ruptured veins.
"Damage report, now."
Esma stared at him. Her pupils widened into dark pools.
You're bleeding everywhere." "The ship, Esme. Report."
His voice was rough. She snapped back to her station.
Total engine failure. Life support's on battery, maybe an hour left. We're in decaying orbit. Closest rock is a moon. Designation, Vesalius."
A knot of ice formed in Rask's stomach, distinct from his injury. Vesalius. The one sanctuary in the sector you avoided when bleeding and hunted. A hospital.
"That figures."
He rasped, pulling himself upright. The protest flared in every muscle fiber. The cold fire in his blood flared, consuming the pain, turning it to fuel.
"Get the main transponder back online. Send a distress call."
"Transponder's melted slag,"
Esme responded, running a diagnostic. Her fingers finding the few responsive keys.
"They were thorough. We're alone out here."
The Hylian ship, the Marrow Thief, slid into view on the main screen. A jagged silhouette of dark metal against the moon's curve below. It hung there, a predator waiting for the kill to stop twitching.
"They'll board us down there,"
Rask said.
"They want the ship. They want the data core. And they want us dead to ensure silence."
He looked at Vesalius's serene, marbled surface growing larger in the viewport.
"Aim for the biggest structure that you see. We're going to make this a messy but controlled crash."
Controlled?
Esma squeaked.
Stitch, the only thing I'm controlling is which part of the moon we hit first.
Then make it a good one.
He said, gripping the console's edge. He could feel his own body breaking down. Tissues tearing on a microscopic level, dumping raw energy into his system.
Brace for impact.
Dr. Talos perceived the world as a symphony of chemical signals. His primary senses, a pair of delicate branching organs that unfurled from just below his cheekbones, tasted the air, translating the universe into patterns of life. He could parse the faint metallic trace of his colleagues' vascular systems beneath their pale Skyean skin, the subtle metabolic esters of their cellular processes, the faint aerosol of their thoughts. The Concordiad Clinic on Vesalius was a testament to harmony, a place where injury and disease were partially tuned back into the rhythm of health. The disruption began as a tremor, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the bioresonance scanners in his surgical suite. Then came the sound, a great, tearing shriek that shattered the moon's quiet. He and his team moved to the observation dome, their soft-soled slippers silent on the polished floors. Outside, under the thin, oxygen-rich atmosphere, a plume of dust and vapor rose from the plains a few kilometers away. At its base lay a mangled wedge of metal, a Terran-designed freighter, its hull scorched and ruptured. The event stood alone in his 60 years as head physician.
"Alert the council,"
Talos said, his voice a calm series of resonant hums.
"and prepare a med team. Standard triage protocols."
His assistant, a younger Skayan named Nyala, shimmered with agitation.
"Our defense grid. Its design should have disabled their vessel."
She noted, her metabolic signature spiked with alarm pheromones.
"The grid and our communication systems fell silent moments before the crash,"
Talos replied.
"The timing is troubling. Our duty remains. Prepare for casualties."
As they assembled near the clinic's main entrance, his senses picked up new signals approaching from the wreck. 3 of them. All Terran, judging by their chaotic, inefficient biochemical signatures. One was faint, its biosigns erratic, suggesting concussion. A second was sharper, showing the clear spike of a bone fracture. The third was a biochemical conflagration. Talos recoiled, his chemoreceptive organs flaring. The volume of stress hormones and catabolic byproducts overwhelmed his senses. It was a walking catastrophe, a body consuming itself from the inside. His scanner, a small device he held in one of his 2 primary hands, shrieked a string of alerts that corroborated the data his own senses were feeding him.
Massive internal hemorrhage, widespread tissue trauma, tachycardia exceeding 220 beats per minute, systemic vascular resistance at critical levels.
The hormonal analysis sent a wave of nausea through him, a flood of catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and glucocorticoids so concentrated it dissolved the subject's own body.
"It's a full catabolic surge,"
he murmured to Nyala, his resonant voice taking on a discordant edge.
"He is actively dissolving his own tissues for fuel."
The figures emerged from the dust-choked haze. A large male Terran with a dazed expression supported a smaller female, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. Leading them, stumbling but moving forward, was the source of the biological chaos. He was a lean man, his face drawn tight, jaw locked, his fatigue soaked in a dark fluid that steamed faintly in the cool air. His movements were stiff and jerky, yet he held the woman's weight with a power that defied his failing body. They reached the clinic's wide entrance. The bleeding man fixed his gaze on Talos, his eyes burning with feverish intensity. He stayed silent, shoving his 2 crewmates forward before his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the sterile plaza, a marionette whose strings had been cut. Talos and his team rushed forward. As he knelt beside the fallen Terran, his scanner provided one final piece of data. He cross-referenced the subject's estimated muscle mass, his injuries, and the distance he had walked from the crash site. The energy expenditure exceeded his biomass's potential by orders of magnitude. The realization struck Talos with the force of a physical blow. The man had cannibalized a significant percentage of his own body to make the journey. The operating theater was a sanctuary of quiet purpose. Gleaming surgical tools lay in arrays, ready for use. Monitors displayed the patient's vitals in flowing lines of light. For Talos, it was a place of restoration, of mending. But the Terran on his table was a violation of every principle of sound biological design he had ever studied. Medical logic dictated Captain Merrick Rask was dead. His team had already transfused 4 liters of synthetic blood and was still fighting to stabilize his pressure. The shrapnel had torn through his abdominal wall, perforated a section of his small intestine, and nicked his descending aorta. A devastating wound, but the secondary damage transfixed Talos.
Look at this.
Dr. Pell murmured, his own chemical signature turning sour with concern. He indicated a microscopic scan of Rask's muscle tissue.
Micro tears in every major muscle group. He's induced widespread rhabdomyolysis. His system is flooded with myoglobin. His kidneys are on the verge of complete failure.
His immune response is being suppressed.
Nyala added, adjusting a nanite infusion.
The glucocorticoid concentration has suppressed it entirely. He's functionally defenseless against infection.
She paused.
And his blood glucose, it's almost 0. How is his brain even functioning?
Dr. Pell gestured to a molecular breakdown.
The efficiency of catabolism is remarkable. If we could isolate and stabilize the primary catalysts,
We would be creating a poison.
Talos interrupted, his tone sharp.
A conflagration that consumes its own source. Let us focus on putting it out, not bottling it.
He straightened up and dictated his official medical log, his voice filling the quiet room.
Patient is a Terran male, approximately age 38 standard years. Subject presents with extreme trauma, but the primary diagnosis is a physiological response to that wound, which surpasses the wound itself in severity.
He paused, searching for the precise language for the butchery he was witnessing.
The Terran endocrine system, under duress, is violently paradoxical. It initiates a controlled self-destruction. The hormonal cascade, which we have termed a catabolic surge, that is a powerful agent, breaking down tissues it deems secondary to provide immediate, high-yield energy to critical systems. We are observing the systematic cannibalization of muscle fiber to maintain glucose levels for neural function.
He gestured toward a monitor displaying Rask's brain activity.
Synaptic processing is accelerated to a degree that would overload and destroy any other known species' nervous system. It allows for rapid tactical assessment at the cost of massive neurochemical debt.
Another doctor, a specialist in xenoneurology named Coral, looked up from her console.
His perception of the last hour must have dilated,
she remarked, her own sense signature shifting with fascination.
He would have experienced time more slowly than his crewmates.
Talos's gaze fell upon the man's face, slack in unconsciousness. The scars that crisscrossed his skin were a history of violence written in scar tissue. Now Talos understood the damage etched into his very cells by this brutal biological imperative.
This mechanism operates on principles alien to our understanding of survival.
Talos continued his dictation, the words feeling heavy and inadequate.
This biological brute force achieves short-term survival by sacrificing long-term viability. It burns the organism's future to fuel its present.
He looked at the array of monitors, at the frantic efforts of his team to undo the damage the man had inflicted upon himself.
We are doing more than healing a wound,
he concluded, his voice dropping to a whisper.
We are treating the wreckage of a biological detonation.
Rask woke to silence and the smell of antiseptic. The world was a dull, throbbing ache, an exhaustion so profound it felt lodged in his bones. It was the crash after the surge, the biological price for borrowing so heavily against his own life. He had felt it before, but never this badly. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was a soft, glowing white. He was in a private recovery room, hooked up to a half-dozen monitors that silently tracked his vitals. A tall, slender being stood by his bed. It stood with its primary arms folded neatly, while a smaller, secondary pair of manipulators held the datapad. Its gaze was steady, unsettlingly direct.
You are awake,
The being said. Its voice was a series of melodic, modulated tones.
I am Dr. Talos. You are in the Concordiate Clinic on Vesalius.
My crew.
Rusk rasped, his throat dry.
The female, Esme, is being treated for a compound fracture of the ulna. The large male, Gunnar, has a moderate concussion. They will both make a full recovery.
Talos said.
You, however, are a more complex case. The physical trauma was severe, but we found your internal chemistry most barbaric.
Rusk managed a dry chuckle that turned into a grimace of pain.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
We flushed your system, counteracted the hormonal flood, and repaired the widespread systemic damage it caused.
Talos continued, ignoring the comment.
Your biology is a study in self-destructive survival. It is aberrant.
Yeah, it works.
Rusk said, pushing himself up onto his elbows. The ache intensified.
That's all that matters.
He scanned the room. His sidearm, his gear, the knife in his boot, all gone.
As per the laws of the Concordiant of Vesalius,
Talos said.
we confiscated all weaponry aboard your vessel. We will sterilize and deconstruct it. This is a place of peace, Captain Rusk.
Rusk stared at him, a sudden chill cutting through his exhaustion.
Disarmed us?
We have protected you.
Talos corrected gently.
This is a place of healing.
You've just signed our death warrants.
Rusk shot back, his voice raw.
Those pirates who shot us down, the Hylians, they're still out there. They followed us back to this rock to finish the job.
Talos's chemoreceptors twitched, a subtle, unreadable contraction.
The Concordiate's neutrality is absolute. All sentient species respect the sanctity of Vesalius.
These Hylians respect only power.
Rusk insisted.
They trade in murder, and when they're done with us, they will kill you too. Just to be tidy.
Talos stiffened.
I assure you, Captain, that is impossible. Our external defense grid is...
He trailed off.
The grid and our communications fell silent just before your arrival. We are investigating this anomaly.
Rusk let out a ragged bark of a laugh.
Anomaly! Dog, that was intentional. That was the prelude. The main show is starting.
He leaned forward, ignoring the fire in his abdomen.
They're already here.
His chemical signature cooled.
You see conflict everywhere, Captain. It is the lens through which you view the universe. But here on Vesalius, we heal. Violence is a disease, and we prevent its spread. You are safe.
Rusk fell back against the pillows, weariness flooding back, heavy as lead. He fell silent. The doctor was a true believer, living in a sanctuary of principle. A sanctuary whose walls were about to be breached. Talos stood in the main observation dome, replaying the Terran's grim certainty in his mind. He tried to dismiss the words as paranoid ramblings, but the silence of the defense grid and communications array was damning. Then he saw it. A ship detached itself from the starfield, descending with a hunter's deliberate grace. A purely martial design, jagged and functional, the color of cooled magma, bristling with weapon emplacements. It was the Hylian marauder, the marrow thief. It settled onto the plain not far from the clinic, its landing struts crushing the delicate native flora. A ramp lowered and a dozen figures emerged. They were massive bipedal creatures, their bodies dense with corded muscle built to withstand crushing pressures. Their skin was a thick gray hide, and in place of eyes, a series of resonating pits perceived the world through vibration and pressure shifts. Their leader, a towering specimen named Husk, surveyed the clinic, his face a featureless plane, angled toward the clinic with predatory focus. A tremor started in his primary manipulators, a sensation he'd only read about in textbooks. Fear.
They have landed.
Nyala whispered beside him, her chemical signature a frantic flutter of panic. Talos moved to the central communication panel, his long fingers activating the external broadcast system.
This is Dr. Talos of the Concordiad Clinic,
he announced, his voice projected across the plains.
You have entered a protected neutral zone. This is a sanctuary of healing, governed by the universal preservation of life. All acts of aggression are forbidden. We ask that you state your intentions.
The reply was a flash of weaponized energy. A lance of brilliant orange energy erupted from the Hylian ship. It crossed the distance and struck the clinic's primary communications disk atop the main spire. The dish, a complex and delicate piece of engineering, vaporized in a flare of white light and molten metal. A calm, automated voice echoed through the clinic's halls. External communications array, offline. External threat protocol, engaged. Talos stared at the dish's wreckage, the smoke curling into the thin atmosphere. Rusk's words echoed in his mind. That was the prelude. A tremor ran through his hands, a sensation he had only ever observed in patients. The distant crump of an explosion sent Merrick Rusk out of the medbed before the automated announcement finished echoing through the halls. His bare feet hit the cold, sterile floor. The profound ache in his body was a dull roar, but the familiar whisper of adrenaline was already snaking through his veins. He found Esma and Gunnar in the main recovery ward. Esma was cradling her arm, now encased in a lightweight cast of shimmering alloy. Gunnar sat on his bed's edge, rubbing his temples, nursing a heavyweight concussion.
Party started,
Rask said, his voice a low rasp. Gunnar looked up, his eyes clearing with the arrival of a threat.
Stitch, you should be in bed. Bed is the first place that they'll look,
Rask countered. He turned to Esma and pointed to a small secondary access panel near a diagnostic station.
That's a low-level engineering node. They're usually unsecured. Get in. Find me schematics, inventory lists, anything with a high power-to-weight ratio. Think tools, medical equipment, anything that can be turned into a weapon.
Esma's expression sharpened. She nodded, already moving toward the panel with the small toolkit she kept on her belt.
On it.
Rask faced Gunnar.
We need barricades, choke points, anything heavy we can move. They'll come through that front door like they own the place, so let's make every inch a struggle.
Gunnar rose, his massive frame a reassuring presence. He nodded once and headed for a row of heavy diagnostic scanners. As Rask turned to coordinate, he found his path blocked by Dr. Talos. The Skaan's pale skin flushed with the hue of agitation, his chemoreceptors quivering with distress.
Captain Rask, what is the meaning of this?
Talos demanded, his voice humming with sharp disapproval.
You are inciting chaos. You must cease these preparations for violence at once.
Rask pushed past the debate.
Doc, I appreciate the patch-up job. I really do. But your welcome wagon just blew up your only phone. They're here for a fight, not a negotiation.
Violence only begets more violence,
Talos insisted, spreading his upper arms in a gesture of placation.
You will doom us all with your savagery.
The word savagery landed like a physical blow. Rask stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Your principles already doomed you the second they took out your defenses. Your rules work fine as long as everyone agrees to play by them. Guess what? They have different rules.
He jabbed a finger toward the main entrance.
I'm giving us a chance. A messy, bloody, horrible chance. It's better than the clean, quiet death that you're offering.
He shoved past the doctor, a protest flaring in every muscle fiber. The brief surge of strength left him winded, but he kept his breathing even. He saw the other Skayan doctors and nurses huddled together, their chemical signatures a chaotic storm. They were healers, masters of their craft, but they faced a disease that required excision, not treatment, and only he knew how. Esma called out from a now-open panel.
Got something! The geology lab in the research wing. High-energy plasma drills, asteroid sample cutters. Basically, industrial-grade can openers.
Perfect. Ross grinned. Gunnar, get that stuff here. We're turning this recovery ward into a fortress.
The doctors watched, their receptors retracting in unison as Gunnar and a few of the braver Skayan orderlies dragged multi-million credit diagnostic machines into defensive positions. Their sanctuary of healing converted into a battlefield. The Concordiate Clinic's main entrance was designed to welcome, a symbol of openness. The Hylians blew it open with a single-shaped charge. The explosion ripped through the atrium, sending shrapnel and dust billowing into the pristine corridors. Hask and his squad moved in formation, rifles sweeping every corner in overlapping arcs. They expected to find cowering doctors, perhaps a brief, symbolic resistance. They found a bottleneck. Gunnar had wedged two massive imaging machines into the main corridor leading from the atrium, leaving a gap barely wide enough for one Hylian to pass through at a time. It was a crude but effective choke point. The first two marauders pushed through the gap. As their feet touched the floor beyond the barricade, the lights flickered. A low hum built to a piercing shriek. Rask, hidden in an alcove down the hall, gave Esma a signal over a short-range comlink they'd salvaged from their suits. Now. Esma slammed her hand down on a bypass she had jury-rigged into the clinic's power grid. An entire conduit's worth of energy, enough to power a surgical wing for a week, surged into a single junction box in the corridor floor. The box detonated with a deafening crack, erupting in a geyser of blue-white plasma. The blast caught the two Hylians, charring and cracking their dense hide as it threw them back against the ceiling. They collapsed in a heap of smoking, twitching limbs. The remaining Hylians recoiled, barking at each other in a series of guttural clicks. They returned fire, spraying the corridor with searing plasma bolts that vaporized chunks of the walls. From his observation post on a higher level, Talos watched the unfolding chaos on a smuggled medical datapad slaved to the clinic's internal sensors, cross-referencing them with the feed from Rask's room. He should have been shepherding his staff to the designated safe zones, but a compulsion held him there to watch. The data streaming across his screen defied all medical sense. Rask moved out from his cover, armed with a geological laser Esma had modified. A clumsy tool designed for cutting rock, but the beam from the laser held steady, cutting a clean line through armor and bone, defying the tremors inherent to such a state. As Rask fought, Talos watched his biometrics. The catabolic surge was back, but this surge was different from the chaotic flood he'd witnessed after the crash. Rask's heart rate climbed to a steady 240 beats per minute. The flow of hormones was a calculated, metered release. He was stoking the chemical furnace, keeping it the exact temperature needed for the task at hand. Every motion had a purpose, his aim unshaken. Talos watched his biometrics spike and level off, a pattern of controlled self-destruction. The realization struck him, a complete inversion of his biological understanding.
He's doing it on purpose,
Talos whispered.
He is weaponizing his own self-immolation.
The first assault ended. The Hylians had retreated, leaving behind 3 of their dead. The clinic fell quiet again, the silence thick with the acrid scent of melted circuitry and vaporized composite. A quick check of the clinic's external sensors showed the Hylians had fallen back to the crash site. They were digging in, a sign they were settling in for a siege. It bought them time. A few hours, maybe. Time to bleed, and time to plan. Rask propped himself against a wall in the hastily fortified recovery ward, the borrowed energy of the surge bleeding out of him. It left him pale and trembling, the deep ache returning with a vengeance. The fresh plasma burn scored a cybernetic forearm. The synthetic skin melted away to reveal the metallic skeleton beneath. He ignored it, focusing on a deep gash on his other arm. A souvenir from a place of flying shrapnel. He worked a suture kit he'd liberated from a medical card, his hands shaking, but he pulled each stitch tight. Talos approached him, his primary hands holding a dermal regenerator. The device emitted a soft, healing glow.
Allow me,
the doctor offered, his voice subdued. Rask shook his head, looking up from his work.
Too slow. I need to feel it.
He pulled the suture tight with a grunt of pain. The sharp, clean agony was an anchor, a reminder that he was still in one piece. Mostly. Talos retracted the regenerator, his receptors flattening in a gesture of confusion. He watched the Terran stitch his own flesh together with a simple needle and thread.
Why?
Talos asked.
Why embrace this breakdown? The damage you've inflicted upon yourself is an order of magnitude greater than any wound the enemy could deliver. Why jettison your own life support just to gain a few moments of thrust?
Rask finished his last stitch and tied it off. He finally looked up, his eyes weary but sharp, cutting through the Skayan's academic curiosity.
Because sometimes one more night is all you get. All you need.
He gestured with his chin to the barricades, the scared doctors, the smoking corridor beyond.
You built this place to fix bodies. You're just lucky someone here knows how to break them.
Talos stood silent. He looked from Rask's bleeding, self-mended arm to the multi-million credit diagnostic machine being used as a shield. He had spent his life studying the elegant, intricate systems of life, learning to preserve them. Rask treated his own body like a disposable tool, a weapon to be used and broken in the service of a greater goal. This philosophy of existence, so alien and brutal, defied all his frames of reference. He was a master of his field, but he realized his entire field of study was one chapter in a much larger, much more violent text. Hask stood over his soldiers' smoking remains. His posture held steady. He cataloged the data. An improvised explosive, a choke point, a shooter with disciplined fire, a professional's work. One of the humans from the crashed ship. His lieutenant, a hulking Hylian named Marn, made a series of frustrated clicks.
They are trapped. We should storm the facility, overwhelm them with numbers.
No, Hask said, his lipless mouth a thin line. His pressure-sensing organs analyzed the blast patterns in the walls, the scoring from the energy weapon.
They have turned the terrain to their advantage. A direct assault would be costly. We will adapt.
He turned and strode back to the breached atrium, his destination the central console. He plugged a data spike into the console. Within moments, the security protocols dissolved.
Some walls are made of conviction,
he said to Marn. His voice, a low, rasping sound like rock shearing under pressure, suddenly filled the clinic's comm system, echoing in every corridor and room.
Doctors of Vesalius, this is Hask. My objective is the humans who have brought their conflict to your sanctuary. They are the disease. You are merely an obstacle.
In the recovery ward, every Skayan froze. Talos's head snapped up.
My instruments show this facility runs on a single primary power generator.
Hask's voice continued, calm and reasonable.
Life support, surgical suites, everything. It is your heart. Disable it, and my forces will permit your staff to evacuate unharmed. My quarrel is with the humans.
The offer hung in the air, a lie designed to sow dissent, to turn the doctors against their reluctant protectors. Talos immediately went to the comm panel.
This is Dr. Talos. We refuse to negotiate. We reject violence. Leave this place.
A pause followed, then a sound like grinding rock. A Hylian chuckle.
A pity,
Hask said.
Your principles will become a significant liability, and your prompt reply from the Central Medical Ward is useful information. Thank you.
The connection cut. The hum of medical equipment remained the only sound. Hask had laid a trap of morality, turning their principles against them. The hunt now targeted Rask and his crew, and the soul of the clinic itself.
He's targeting the generator,
Rask said, the moment the comms went dead. A logical next move. Cripple the clinic, plunge it into darkness, and finish the job. Esma was already at a terminal, her fingers sweeping across the holographic interface, pulling up schematics in a shower of light.
He's right. All primary systems route through a single fusion generator in the sublevel. I'm pulling up the schematics. Got it. But the Hylians are already moving. They're splitting into two teams. One to keep us pinned here, and the other to make a direct run for the engineering section.
Rask looked at Gunnar. The big man was solid. A rock, but he lacked speed. Esma, a tech, lacked a sprinter's speed.
I am the only one fast enough to get there,
Gunnar protested.
Stitch, you're unsteady on your feet. I only have to run.
Rask grunted. He closed his eyes for a second, focusing inward. He opened the floodgates. The catabolic surge flooded him. The world sharpened into acute clarity. The ache vanished, scoured away by a chemical fire. His heart pounded a powerful, frantic beat, and a deep breath felt like pure oxygen.
Esme, guide me,
he said, his voice flat and steady. He picked up the heavy geological laser.
Gunnar, hold this room. Keep them from getting to the docks.
Gunnar just nodded, his expression grim. He hefted a thick metal gurney leg like a club. Rask ran. The clinic's corridors became a blur. Esma's voice was a calm presence in his ear, feeding him directions through the comm bead.
Left to the next junction. They've sealed the primary route, so take the maintenance crawl space on your right.
As he ran, his perception of time dilated. The emergency light's flicker slowed to a lazy pulse. The distant sound of plasma fire became a series of distinct, separate explosions. He could see the individual dust motes dancing in the air. A plasma bolt seared past his head, and he felt its heat wash over his back a fraction of a second before he heard the sizzle. He flowed into the safe space beside its path. Talos, watching his biometrics remotely, felt a fresh wave of clinical horror. Rask's metabolic rate had spiked to levels every medical text in the galaxy considered instantly fatal. His core temperature rose to the point of protein denaturation. His neural activity was a firestorm of activity. He was burning himself alive from the inside out, a star collapsing under its own gravity. Rask burst into the main engineering section, a vast cathedral-like room filled with the primary generator's hum. Two Hylians stood there, planting explosive charges in the main control console. In the corner, cowering behind a diagnostic panel, were Talos and several other Skayan physicians who had been trapped during the assault. The Hylians turned, surprised by his sudden appearance. One of them raised its rifle, but aimed at the huddle of doctors. It aimed at Talos. Rask's instinct asserted itself over self-preservation. He threw himself forward, covering the distance in 3 long strides, and put himself directly in the plasma bolt's path. It struck his cybernetic arm. The impact was immense. The arm, its design able to withstand industrial accidents, glowed white-hot and then buckled, a shower of molten metal and shattered composites spraying across the room. The blast threw him back against the console, and he slumped to the floor, his left arm a mangled, smoking ruin. But he was still moving. He lunged up from the ground, the geological laser left behind. He grabbed a loose power conduit from the floor with his good hand and whipped it like a metal bullwhip, wrapping it around the neck of the Hylian who shot him. With a surge of desperate strength, he yanked, pulling the massive creature off balance. He drove his shoulder into its chest, and they both went down. The second Hylian fired, but Rask rolled, using the first one's body as a shield. The plasma bolt hit the downed marauder squarely in the back. Rask leapt to his feet in an instant, a specter of focused rage. He kicked the rifle from the second Hylian's grasp and delivered a brutal series of blows with his good arm. Fist, elbow, knee. Each one delivered with the full, desperate force of his burning body. The Hylian, adapted to high gravity and built like a walking tank, stumbled backward, the sheer speed of the assault overwhelming its pressure-sensing organs. Rask finished it with a final, crushing blow to its broad, featureless face. He stood there for a moment, swaying, the only sound his own ragged breathing. Then he slumped against the generator console, the surge finally sputtering out, leaving only the cold ash of exhaustion. Talos stared, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The violence was brutal, savage, but Rask had shielded him, choosing to intercept a fatal blow. He whispered to a colleague, his voice trembling as he analyzed the data still streaming from Rask's monitors.
His limbic system registered a fatal threat to another organism. The cerebral command center countermanded the fight-or-flight response. He actively chose a self-destructive, protective outcome.
He looked at the bleeding, broken human slumped against the console.
It's a biological contradiction.
While medics rushed Rask back to the surgical suite, his life fading, Esma Solana worked. She knew this fight would continue. Hask was too deliberate to rely on a single plan. She needed to know why he was so persistent. Hunched over a terminal, she focused on decrypting the hardened data core she had pulled from the Peregrine before the crash. The encryption was military grade, but the Hylians had left behind fragments of their own slicing software during their attempt to breach the ship's systems. A long shot, but she could use their own tools against them. Hours bled by. Finally, a single file broke open. A fragment, but it was enough. A contract. Her eyes widened as she read the details. The contract was between Hask and Omnimed, one of the largest medical tech corporations in the galaxy, and, ironically, a major sponsor of the Concordiate Clinic. The target was a high-level executive from a rival corporation, Cytodyne, named Ceres Vane. The objective was listed as permanent asset removal. A cold certainty settled in her gut. She cross-referenced the name with the clinic's patient manifest. The clinic's manifest omitted Ceres Vane's name, but Hask's intelligence was always impeccable. She initiated a search based on biological markers detailed in the contract. A rare genetic condition specific to Vane's species. A name popped up. A patient admitted 2 weeks ago under a pseudonym, Porlan Gesh, for advanced gene therapy. The clinic administered the therapy in the long-term care wing. The patient was Ceres Vane. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Hask held a larger objective than them. The Peregrine's crew were witnesses to be cleaned up. His primary mission was to assassinate Vane. Killing the target was the first step. The contract on the data core proved Omnimed's involvement. He had to retrieve the core. And to sever the link completely, he had to erase all evidence of Vane's presence at the clinic.
Oh, hell.
Esma breathed. She scrambled to access the clinic's data architecture schematics.
The central server room. The backups.
Hask's goal was total annihilation of data. He had to kill Vane, retrieve the core from their wrecked ship, and then destroy the clinic's central computer and all its redundant backups. That was his final objective. Their new objective expanded beyond survival. They had to protect the server room. Talos gathered a senior medical staff in the main surgical theater, now a makeshift command center. The air was thick with tension and the smell of cauterized metal. The faces of his colleagues reflected his own turmoil, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and profound confusion.
The Terran, Rask, is stable,
he said, his voice low and steady.
But the repeated, deliberate activation of the catabolic surge system has pushed his system to the brink of irreversible collapse. He is dying.
A heavy silence fell over the room. These were beings who had dedicated their lives to reversing death, to healing. The idea of a patient willingly destroying himself was anathema.
The Hylians will attack again,
Talos continued, facing the grim reality.
Their objective now appears to be the clinic's data core, in addition to the Terrans. They mean to erase their presence here completely. Our philosophy, our sacred principles have left us defenseless. Our only hope of survival lies with the very beings whose nature confounds and horrifies us.
He looked from face to face. He saw his own conviction mirrored in their weary expressions. Their ideals were pure, but purity offered little defense against a plasma bolt. Having made his decision, he went to Rask's recovery room. The human was conscious, his breathing shallow. Surgeons had removed his mangled cybernetic arm, leaving a capped stump at his shoulder. Gunnar and Esme stood vigil at his bedside. Talos dismissed them with a gentle gesture of a primary hand. He stood over Rask, his senses analyzing the man's decaying systems.
The repeated surges are killing you, Captain,
Talos said, his tone intimate with the gravity of a terminal diagnosis.
You have burned out your star. Your adrenal glands are failing. Your neural pathways are frayed. Another surge of that magnitude will be your last.
Rask gave a weak, tired smile.
Go out with a bang, right?
Perhaps,
Talos said.
but I can offer you a bigger one.
He produced a hypo-spray injector from a fold in his robes. The liquid inside was a vibrant, shimmering gold.
I have spent the last few hours studying your blood,
Talos said, his voice a near whisper.
the catalysts that trigger your catabolic surge. I have synthesized them, concentrated them.
He held up the injector.
This cocktail contains only your own compounds, Captain. It is your own biology, distilled into a fatal dose. It offers only a final burst of strength. It will trigger one final massive surge, far beyond what your body can produce. It will consume you completely, giving you perhaps 1 hour of peak physical performance.
Talos met Rask's gaze, the weight of his decision heavy on his conscience.
Administering this violates every ethical and medical principle that I hold sacred. It is a poison disguised as a cure.
He extended his hand, offering the injector.
It may also be the only way that you can win.
Rask looked at the golden liquid in the injector. A final, glorious fire. A way to burn away the last of his fuel in a single, decisive blaze. He looked past Talos, to the doorway where Esma and Gunnar stood, their faces etched with worry. He saw the Skayan doctors huddled behind a gurney down the hall, their wide eyes filled with a terror he now felt responsible for dispelling. He'd been running on fumes for years, patching up wounds with synth flesh and grit, pushing his body through one more fight, one more contract. The crash, the surge, the fight. It had all just been the final drawdown on an account that was already overdrawn. Talos offered him more than a weapon. He offered him a choice on how to close it out. He let out a slow breath and looked back at the doctor.
I have been running on fumes for years, Doc. Let's light the old tank.
Talos' hand was steady as he pressed the hypospray to Rask's neck. The injector hissed. The effect was absolute. Ice flooded him. A clean, cold clarity washed through him, scouring away the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. His thoughts, which had been a muddy, sluggish river, became a perfectly straight, clear stream. His senses sharpened. He heard the low hum of the lights, felt the subtle vibrations of the generator in the floor, saw the individual fibers in the blanket covering him. Talos watched the biometric readings in a nearby monitor, his receptors flaring in astonishment.
Incredible,
He murmured.
His system is beyond accelerated. It's self-fueling now. The catabolic cascade is creating a positive feedback loop. It's theoretically impossible.
Rask swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. He felt only a cold, diamond-hard purpose. He looked at his one remaining arm, then at his crew.
This is how it ends.
He said, his voice calm and clear.
Esme, your eyes and ears. Get back on the comms network. I want you to feed them ghosts. Lead them on a wild goose chase. Use every trick in the clinic system against them. Sterilization protocols, blast doors, maintenance drones, anything.
Esma nodded, her expression a mixture of awe and terror.
Gunnar,
Rask continued, turning to his oldest friend.
the server room. That's the real target. You're the wall. You will hold that line.
Gunnar's jaw was tight.
And you?
Rask gave a thin, cold smile.
Hask thinks that he's the hunter here. He's wrong.
He turned and walked out of the room, his movements economical and direct.
I'm going to hunt him.
The final battle for the Concordiate Clinic began with a whisper of misinformation. The main force of the Hylians, led by Hask's lieutenant Marn, assaulted the corridor leading to the server room. They expected a straight fight. They got a nightmare orchestrated by Esma Solana.
Okay, you big ugly bastards.
She muttered, her commands scrolling across the terminal faster than they could be read.
Let's play.
The first squad breached the corridor. Esma triggered the fire suppression system, filling the hall with thick, disorienting foam. The Hylians' vibrational senses went haywire, the sound-dampening foam turning the world into a muffled, featureless void. As they stumbled forward, she sealed a blast door behind them, trapping them, then activated the high-intensity UV sterilization lamps used to decontaminate surgical tools. Searing, cell-destroying radiation flooded the corridor. The Hylians roared in pain and confusion. At the end of the hall, Gunnar Creed stood his ground. He wedged a massive, damaged data rack into the server room's doorway, creating a near-impenetrable shield. The few Hylians who made it through Esma's gauntlet met a silent, immovable object. Gunnar used the heavy gurney leg like a warhammer, his movements economical and brutal. It was an avalanche of quiet determination. Each swing was a final, emphatic statement. While Esma systematically dismantled his forces, Hask moved through the clinic alone. He had the executive's location. He would handle the assassination himself while Marn secured the data objective. He moved with a hunter's patience, his senses scanning the environment, alert for any trap. What he sensed was a ghost. Rask moved through the corridors like a specter. Esma had fed him Hask's position, tracking him through the clinic's life sign sensors. He bypassed the Hylian squads, flowing around them, a phantom in the machine, his single-minded purpose fixed on their leader. He ambushed the first of Hask's personal guard in a hydro garden, using the thick, alien foliage for cover. The attack was brutal and silent, over in a heartbeat. The second he took down in a darkened supply closet. The fight over before the Hylian raised his weapon. Hask felt his guards vanish from his senses one by one. He stopped in a long, sterile corridor center. The human was hunting. He was turning the tables. A low series of clicks vibrated in Hask's chest. That was unexpected. This was interesting. He keyed his comm.
Marn, report.
Static was his only answer. Hask turned slowly, scanning the empty hall. He realized his mistake. He had treated the human as prey. But the creature stalking him now, a being running on a cocktail of chemical fury, was something else entirely. It was an apex predator. Rask found him in the grand atrium, the site of the first breach. Moonlight streamed in through the shattered entrance, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Hask stood alone, his plasma rifle held at a relaxed ready.
You have been a surprising amount of trouble, human.
Hask rasped, his head tilting as his senses mapped Rask's position.
I aim to please,
Rask said, his voice eerily calm. He held the sharpened leg of a collapsed gurney in his one good hand, its metal point gleaming. The fight was a collision, brief and brutal. Hask was bigger, stronger, his high-gravity physiology giving him immense power. He fired a bolt of plasma that Rask evaded with a fluid, sideways leap. The cocktail's cold clarity showed him the bolt's path before it was even fully formed. Rask closed the distance. Hask swung the rifle like a club, a blow that would have shattered Gunnar's bones. Rask ducked under it, his movements preternaturally smooth. He drove the pointed metal stake into the junction of Husk's leg and hip, a spot his analysis of Hylian anatomy told him was a weak point in their endoskeleton. The metal punched through the dense hide. Husk roared, a sound of fury and pain, and backhanded Rask across the atrium. The blow crushed him. Rask felt his ribs crack, but the pain became a distant, irrelevant signal. He hit the far wall and slid to the floor, but he rose again in an instant, a relentless engine of violence. He came at Husk again, now unarmed, a blur of motion. His thoughts shifted from tactics to pure vectors and impact points. He used Husk's size and momentum against him, redirecting a charge, tripping him over a piece of debris. They fell in a heap, and Rask, with his one good arm, delivered a rapid series of strikes, knuckles cracking against the resonating pits on Husk's face. Rask disarmed and crippled him, his leg shattered, his sensory organs damaged, his senses overwhelmed by his speed and ferocity they were unequipped to track. Husk lay on the atrium floor, helpless. Rask stood over him, his chest heaving. He picked up Husk's plasma rifle, the weapon heavy in his hand. He raised it, pointing the muzzle at the Hylian's head. Husk let out a series of grating clicks, a sound of contemptuous laughter.
Go ahead,
He sneered.
be the animal they think you are. Finish it.
Rask's finger tightened on the trigger. The cocktail's cold logic screamed at him to eliminate the threat. The smart move, the final, logical step. But then, from a shadowed doorway at the atrium's edge, he saw a figure, Dr. Talos, watching him. His posture one of intense, unwavering focus. He stood as a witness to what Rask would do next. The human thing to do. The animal thing to do. Maybe, he thought, the line between them had blurred. With a sharp exhalation, Rask lowered the weapon. He ejected the power cell, rendering it inert. He tossed it aside. He knelt and used Husk's own comm unit to broadcast a single message to the marrow thief in orbit.
Your leader is alive. Your leader is alive. Your mission is over. Stand down and prepare for boarding by Concordiate authorities, or he dies.
He stood up, leaving the defeated Hylian leader on the floor. His job was done. And as the last of his fury subsided, the cold clarity in his mind began to melt, revealing the utter devastation beneath. The crash was absolute. One moment, Merrick Rask stood tall, a victor in the atrium's ruins. The next, the chemical scaffold holding him together dissolved. The cocktail's effects vanished like a flipped switch. Every wound, every torn muscle, every frayed nerve, every shattered piece of his biology came rushing back at once. He collapsed, his system failing completely. His heart stuttered into a chaotic, fibrillating rhythm. His breathing ceased. Talos and his team rushed to him in an instant. They had been waiting, prepared for this very moment. They worked with desperate, focused grace, applying defibrillators, injecting stabilizers, fighting to restart his failed systems. Days later, the Concordiate Clinic was returning to a state of normalcy. Galactic authorities had arrived, taking the surviving Hylians, including a captive Husk, into custody. The data core from the Peregrine, along with the Cytodyne executive's testimony, triggered a massive investigation into Omnimed. Their actions saved the clinic. Rask was stable but unconscious in the intensive care unit, his body a wasteland of medical alerts. He faced a long, uncertain recovery, the full extent of the neurological and systemic damage still undetermined. Esme and Gunnar were constant fixtures at his bedside, their quiet vigil a testament to a loyalty proven in crisis. In his office, overlooking a tranquil garden now littered with scorch marks and debris, Talos finished a new addendum to the Skayan medical database. It was the culmination of his observations, a complete rewriting of their understanding of Terran physiology. He dictated his final entry, his voice slow and reflective.
Conclusion. The The Terran capacity for conscious catabolic surge activation is a tool of last resort, a feature distinct from a biological flaw. It is a self-immolating mechanism that allows the organism to trade its own long-term well-being for the immediate survival of itself or others. The process is physiologically catastrophic, violating every known principle of biological economy and self-preservation. He paused, looking out the window at the human crew in the distance. Esme telling a quiet story to Gunnar, who managed a small, sad smile. We initially assessed this capacity as a horrifying path to death. We were wrong. He looked at the live feed from Rosk's room, at the man's still form, kept alive by the very machines he had fought to protect. For them, it is also a path to victory, one purchased at a cost that defies the biological imperatives of every other known species in the galaxy. Talos fell silent. He looked at the words he had written, the clinical language feeling inadequate to capture the truth of what he had witnessed. The Terran's physiology remained an abomination in his physician's eyes. A chaotic, brutal, self-destructive design. But it was an abomination that had saved them all. The first thing Merrick Rosk knew was the quiet. Not the pressurized silence of a ship, but the gentle, living quiet of clean air and soft light. The second was the phantom ache where his left arm should have been. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was the same soft white, but the room felt different, warmer. Gunnar was asleep in a chair by the window, slumped in exhaustion. Esme was at the foot of the bed, looking at a datapad. She looked up and saw his eyes were open. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "Hey, sleepyhead," she whispered, a tremor of relief quietly shaking her voice. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Gunnar stirred at the sound, his head snapping up. He saw Rosk was awake, and a deep sigh of relief rumbled in his chest. He just nodded, a mountain of unspoken words in the simple gesture. 3 weeks, Esme said, moving to his side. You were a mess, Stitch. They had to rebuild, like, everything. She gestured to the empty space at his shoulder. Almost everything. Rosk looked at the neatly capped and sealed stump. He'd lost count of the scars and cybernetics he'd collected over the years. This was just the biggest one. He felt a pang of loss, but it was distant, dulled by a profound sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The crew? Gunnar's fine. Heads as hard as they come, huh? Esme said, grinning at the big man. My arm is better than new. And the clinic, they're rebuilding. The Concordiad's hailing us as heroes. She held up the datapad. Cytodyne is, grateful. So grateful, in fact, that they've paid off all of our debts. Settled all our outstanding warrants and deposited a survivor's bonus into our account that would make a planetary governor blush. She leaned in conspiratorially. They also owe us a ship. Any ship that we want fresh from the factory. For the first time in a long time, Merrick Rosk wasn't in debt. He wasn't running. He wasn't just surviving until the next payday. The thought was so foreign, he didn't know what to do with it. Just then, Dr. Talos entered the room. The Skayan's movements were as graceful as ever, but there was a new quality to his gaze as he looked at Rosk. Not clinical curiosity, but something closer to respect. Captain? Talos hummed, his resonant voice calm. It is good to see that you are conscious. He came to the bedside, his secondary manipulators holding a small, intricate device. Your recovery is, like the rest of your biology, a statistical improbability. I've been called worse, Rosk said, a weak smile touching his lips. We have had much time to talk, your crew and I. Talos continued. He looked from Esme's sharp, intelligent eyes to Gunnar's quiet stoicism. I have learned a great deal. My report to the Concordiant Medical Council has caused a significant reevaluation of Terran physiology. We've classified your catabolic surge as a flaw, a suicidal, self-destructive panic response.
He paused, his gaze unwavering.
We were arrogant. It is not a flaw. It is a choice.
Talos looked toward the atrium, visible through the recovery room's large window.
You had every biological and tactical imperative to execute Hask. The cocktail I gave you was designed to strip away everything but that primal instinct. It should have left you a pure engine of destruction.
His chemoreceptors twitched slightly.
But you did not kill him. In the heart of your own self-immolation, you made a choice for something other than violence. You chose mercy. You chose order.
Rask thought back to that moment, the rifle in his hand, Talos watching from the shadows. He hadn't just been fighting for his life, or for his crew. He had been fighting for the sanctuary, for the very idea that a place like this could exist. He'd burned himself down to protect a principle he'd spent his entire life sneering at.
I guess I had a good teacher,
Rask said, nodding at the doctor. Talos offered a gesture that might have been a Skayan smile.
And we had a brutal but effective lesson.
He held up the device he was carrying. It was a cybernetic arm, but unlike the clunky industrial models Rask was used to, this one was sleek, sculpted from a material that seemed to drink the light, its lines elegant and organic.
This is a gift from the clinic. It is Skayan biointegration technology, married to Terran durability specifications. It will not be as strong as your old one, but its neural interface is more precise. It is a tool for building, not just for breaking.
He placed it gently on the bedside table. A peace offering between two philosophies. A bridge built from wreckage. For in the cold, logical calculus of the universe, where every other species fought to preserve themselves, humanity stood alone. They were the ones who understood that some things were worth more than survival. They were the ones willing to set themselves on fire, to become a short-lived, impossibly bright star, just to hold back the endless night.